A brief but hopefully thorough overview of the laws around women's head covering. I chose four topics that I felt very much reflected a lot of the identity of where Jewish women in observing communities, Jewish women looking for greater connection to their identity, to practice, to ritual, to uh, to how they present themselves. I tried to choose four topics that really reflected that intersection, their intersection with family, with community. And this last one really reflects marriage. The first one we're really looking at that has to do with a woman's crossing a boundary into a married relationship, which is when the question of head covering or hair covering, not necessarily the same thing, comes into play. And so what I want to start out with, and I'm gonna share. Oh, I do. Can you please let me share my screen? I'd like to share my screen. Thank you. Jay shared the sources, but I tend to like to look along while I'm talking to you, so I'm not just looking at my paper. I'm looking at you as well. And so the first source I actually want to start with is the Mishnah. So I'm going to skip the first few sources. We're going to come back to them. But what I want to start with is the Mishnah in Ketubot on 72a, that it says, Ve'elo yotzot shelo b'ktubah. The following are to be divorced without receiving their ktubah. And now the Mishnah does something that doesn't really appear anywhere else in the Talmud. It begins to talk about mitzvahs that are in the categories of Dat Moshe and Dat Yehudit. Very singular. Very like mitzvot aseh shahazman grama, those positive time-caused commandments we talked about in the first class, that they serve no other purpose except to distinguish women from men in mitzvah obligation. Here too, Dat Moshe and Dat Yehudit do not really appear anywhere else in the Talmud. That's not the common way in which we talk about mitzvot, but we're going to see that it's useful for the breakdown of behavior of women in this particular passage. And I'd like to suggest that Dat Moshe is meant to contrast with Dat Yehudit. I'll explain both in a moment, because D'Oraita and D'Rabbanan, Torah law and rabbinic law, don't really work here, because we're getting at something else entirely with Dat Yehudit. It is neither rabbinic nor biblical, and so we're going to look for different language. So what do we have here? The women who go out without their ketubah, a woman who violates Dat Moshe or Dat Yehudit. What is Dat Moshe? And here are the examples: feeding her husband untithed food, having intercourse with him during the period of her menstruation, not setting apart the dough offering, or making vows and not fulfilling them. Now, all four of those appear in the Torah in different places. And what's interesting about the four is that she could really get away with these violations. These are violations that rest on a trust a man has towards his wife who is running the household, who is in charge implicitly or explicitly for certain aspects of the household, of the intimacy, when we think about mikvah, and even vows. A man is allowed to annul his wife's vows. A man who does not annul her vows is showing trust that she is going to fulfill those vows. And if she doesn't, it's a betrayal of his trust, because he could have annulled the vow, says Sefer Bamidbar. We're not going to go into what we think about that. I'm just explaining that all four have a common thread. He assumes she is making sure the food is tithed. He assumes the challah is being separated because the kitchen, the food, is really under her purview. He assumes she's going to the mikvah, which is why he has sexual relations with her, and he assumes she is fulfilling her vows, which is why he does not nullify them. Those become the examples of Dat Moshe in the Mishnah. Now we go to Dat Yehudit, going out with her head uncovered, spinning in the marketplace, or conversing with every man. Abba Shaul says one who curses his parents in front of him. Rabbi Tarfon says the woman with a loud voice. And what is a loud-voiced woman? When she speaks in her house and her neighbors hear her. In another rabbinic text, they're going to suggest a woman who is very loud during sexual relations, that there's something immodest about a woman who is too vocal while she is in that act so that others hear her. All four of these also rest on the premise of marriage, but none of them are clearly violations of any law, right? Going out with her head uncovered, we don't really have we don't have a specific commandment. We don't have another Mishnah that tells us a woman has to cover her head. We only have the negative. Going out with her head uncovered is grounds for divorce without a ketubah. Spinning in the marketplace, which the Rashi explains, but the Tosefta really tells us as well. Her clothing becomes somewhat disheveled and reveals parts of her body when she's spinning on the spinning wheel, either because she has to spread her legs or maybe her arms, the fabric rides up. And then we have conversing with every man. So all of these are examples of what I think is fair to say immodest behavior that threatens the fabric of the marriage, but not just the marriage. I'm going to go further. It threatens the fabric of society. This is a woman who is defying societal norms, a married woman who is defying societal norms and putting the society at risk for adultery, which is the worst form of promiscuity. So the idea that she can be divorced without her ketubah, it's called or defined as dat Yehudit. Again, what is that? What category does that fall into? But the author of the Mishnah is comfortable using that terminology and suggesting here by the examples that you, the reader, will understand that these are grave violations of societal norms. This is not what is it rabbinic? Is it biblical? It doesn't fit into that kind of mindset. This is the kind of behavior that will force a divorce, will result in a divorce without ketubah, which is an enormous, enormous penalty, enormous consequence. For a woman to be divorced without ketubah is essentially rendering her without any sort of financial backing, unless she happens to have a wealthy father. But barring that, the ketubah was her insurance policy that she would financially be able to get back on her feet, and it's considered to be a very heavy stick indeed. And it's used very deliberately for these examples, betraying your husband's trust by essentially hiding from him that he is violating biblical law, dat Moshe, all biblical law. That. Now, what's interesting here is, and there's more to say, and there are not a lot of other texts to look at, but the parallel Tosefta happens to be an interesting one. But I'm interested in the Talmud, in what the Bavli does here. And what I want to point out is the Bavli is actually going to go up against the Mishnah. It doesn't happen that often. Usually, if you're going to go up against a Mishnah, you bring in another Tannaitic source, which it is kind of, okay? But we're going to see what happens in the Bavli, and already the Bavli understands there's a weakness to dat Yehudit that biblical and rabbinic law do not have. What is dat Yehudit? Who gets to decide what is this category of dat Yehudit? And now the Bavli is going to make the leap. The Mishnah states that what is a woman who violates dat Yehudit? One who goes out yotzav rosha parua. Rosha parua deoraita he. The Bavli doesn't flinch. It doesn't blink. If you go out with your head bared, says the Bavli, you are violating biblical law. Remember, the Mishnah does not say anything about a deoraita there. The Mishnah says a bared head is dat Yehudit. The Bavli, without blinking, says, no. Bared head is deoraita, dichtiv upara et rosh haisha. And he bared disheveled. The word para deserves its own look. What does the word para mean? But by the time we get to the Bavli, the Talmud, it is understood to be he bears the head of the woman, the head of the woman. Vitana devei Rabbi Yishmael azhara the benot Yisrael shelo yitzu b'paru arosh. So he now quotes, the Bavli now quotes a Midrash Halacha, which I'm going to show you in a moment, that says, oh, I can even bring a Tanaitic teaching that it's a warning to the daughters of Israel not to go out with bared head. One aside, you don't see the word hair being used here. This is not about amounts of hair being covered. Presumably, if you covered your head, you were covering your hair. Also, women didn't dishevel or wear long, loose hair in the way they would do today. But we're not talking about hair here. We're talking about something covering her head. The Gemara now has to somehow dial back and integrate with the Mishnah. Doraita kalta shapir dami dat Yehudit afilu kalta nami asur. So the conclusion of the Bavli is there is a biblical prohibition to go out with one's head bared, for a woman to go out with her head bared, based on the verse from Sota, from the Pasuk in Bamidbar, and the Kohen bared the head of the woman. And then what do we do with the Mishnah calling it dat Yehudit? That's okay. A secondary head covering. The basic head covering is deoraita, but dat Yehudit, a woman would have to go out with two head coverings in order to avoid being divorced without ketubah. Okay? That's how the Bavli does it. Now, I want to go back for a minute just to show us. Here's our pasuk. After he has made the woman stand before the Lord, the priest shall bear the woman's head and place upon her hands the meal offering of remembrance. Here is my sifrei. The language is a little bit different than in the Talmud. And he uncovered the head of the woman. Learn from this, there's an irony here, pay attention, that the daughters of Israel would cover their heads. They did cover their heads. And even though there is no proof of this, now why is that interesting? Because we're in a Midrash Halacha on which book? The book of Bamidbar. I thought my proof text, after learning the Babylonian Talmud, is in Bamidbar. But the Midrash on Bamidbar says I have no proof from the text. Where am I going to go to find a proof text? I'm going to find an allusion in the book of Samuel, in the book of Shmuel, that Tamar took ashes and put them on her head. Unfortunately, Tamar puts ashes on her head not to cover her head, but in grief and mourning over the loss of her virginity after she is brutally raped by her half-brother Amnon. But that's where the Midrash Halacha goes, not to the Sota, which is where it's situated in the Midrash, but to another verse entirely, because as it says, I don't have proof of this, that the daughters of Israel must cover their head. I understand from this the daughters of Israel would cover their heads. And my proof text is Tamar. Okay? And the idea is that although Tamar is not married, she is no longer a virgin, and so her status has changed in society. There is a lot more we could do here. I could park us here. We could do a lot of other texts from the Talmud on women and head covering in the time of the Talmud, but we are not going to do that because I want to move along. There's a whole nother section I want to get to. The question, though, that I want to leave you with, that as we move forward, is head covering of a woman, once she is married, dat Yehudit or deoraita? Where is it? How do we define it? What do we do with it? There's an ambiguity here. Already from the Sifrei and from the Mishnah, the Bavli tries to clarify that by saying, no, there's no ambiguity. It's deoraita. What's deoraita? A little basket on her head, a little kippah, some sort of covering. But the secondary covering, that's more serious. That's the dat Yehudit. Okay, so hopefully we've gotten that. What I want to show you as I move forward is this. This is going to continue into the Rishonim, this discourse. Is it biblical or is it something else? Rabbinic, dat Yehudit, whatever dat Yehudit is. It continues in the Rishonim. I want to show you what the Rambam does, but even after the Rambam, there is not full clarity. The Rambam does something interesting. Maimonides in Hilchot Ishut, Laws of Marriage. If a woman has done one of the following, she is considered to have violated Dat Moshe, going out in the marketplace with the hair of her head uncovered. Maimonides fully incorporates the conclusion of the Bavli and now defines it as Dat Moshe. And he continues making vows or taking oaths and not fulfilling them, having intercourse with her husband during the period of her menstruation, not setting apart the dough offering, right? These were all the examples we saw in the Mishnah. The Rambam has added bared head. And then what does he do with Dat Yehudit? What is Dat Yehudit? Because the Rambam wants to define what it is. Those are the modest practices which the daughters of Israel practice. If a woman has done one of the following, she's considered to have violated Dat Yehudit, going out in the marketplace or in a through alley with her head uncovered and without the headscarf that all other women wear, even though her head is covered by a kerchief, right? That's what the Bavli's conclusion was, the double head covering. Or spinning in the marketplace with rouge or the like on her face or on her forehead or cheeks in the manner of the promiscuous non-Jewish women. The Rambam adds to Dat Yehudit something that's not in the Mishnah, wearing some sort of makeup, some sort of color on her cheeks and forehead. That would be promiscuity. So we understand that Dat Yehudit is going to morph into other things as time goes on, and there are differences in modesty practices between the daughters of Israel. But before we move to the next section, just to show you that after the Rambam, we have two Sefer Mitzvot, Sefer Mitzvot Gadol, Sefer Mitzvot Katan. They're going to categorize head covering into the mitzvah of divorce. There's a mitzvah to divorce your wife if you divorce her, right? And what does he write here? If a woman has done one of the following on the left-hand side, going out in the marketplace with her hair covered, he calls that Dat Moshe. Sefer Mitzvot Gadol follows Maimonides. Great. But take a look on the left. He does not put head covering on the right, on the right-hand side. He says, Dat Moshe is he follows the Mishnah, feeding untithed food, intercourse with him during her period, not setting aside the dough offering. And what is Dat Yehudit? Going out with her head uncovered, even with a work basket. She needs more than a work basket. So here, the Sefer Mitzvot Katan does not seem to go as firmly in the direction of Deoraita. It puts it down as Dat Yehudit, and then he says, well, Dat Yehudit has standards. It's not enough to have a work basket. You need more, right? So the work basket comes in. But he clearly is downgrading head covering from the full-on Deoraita to something in the Dat Yehudit camp, whereas the Sefer Mitzvot Gadol, these are more or less at the same time, right, is saying it's violation of Dat Moshe. That debate, that tension, that argument, is it a positive mitzvah? Is it a negative mitzvah? Is there a transgression or is there an assay? Well, is it a positive mitzvah? Now, clearly there's consequence because if she bears her head, she could be divorced without ketubah. But is it a violation of a positive commandment or a transgression of a negative commandment? What is it? I want to take a look at the Maharam al-Shaker. But until now, I just want to point something out. In all of the discussions about bared heads and baskets and Dat Yehudit, we do not find hair really being mentioned or defined. If you cover your head, you cover your hair. And the Rambam actually writes covering the hair of her head. But a lot of the earlier rabbinic sources talk about bearing head, including the Sota. It's not the hair of her head, it's bearing her head. Now, to me, that distinction is significant because did she have to cover her hair or did she have to cover her head in the manner of a kippah? Those are not the same thing. Those are not the same thing. The Maharam al-Shaker, who lives in the 1300s, I really should have that exactly. I love the Maharam al-Shaker. And he lives in Algeria, I believe. Although I might be confusing him with hold on. Let me just get the citation. course, whenever you want to find a source, it's not there. The Maharam is going to be here it is. Rabbi Moshe ben Yitzchak al-Shakar, known as the Maharam al-Shakar, he lived in the 15th and 16th centuries and served communities in Tunisia, Greece, and Cairo. Okay. He writes a responsum about women whose practice was to uncover some of their hair. So now we're moving more into amounts of hair that have to be covered. And he's writing this after the Zohar has written that women have to cover every hair on their head in order to protect their household. Let me just see oh, here's the Zohar. Okay. I'm going to pause. Until now, we've been looking at Yudit. I should not have rushed to the Maharam. We're going to get to the Maharam. I'm putting the Maharam on the side. I've told you who he is. We're going to come back to him. He's not in the right place. Yudit, divorce without a ketubah, clearly threatens the social fabric and hints at adultery. We have to be very strict about this. So strict that the Bavli comes along and makes the jump of it has to be a doraita. If it's not anchored in a verse, it will not be as authoritative, as effective in terms of its long-lasting effectiveness. That is my opinion of what's happening in the Bavli. Let's take a look at another source in the Bavli, something we've seen. We saw it last week. Se'ar bi'isha erva. The hair of a woman is erva. Now, what we saw last week is that whole erva series is about nakedness and kriyat shema. So much so that the Rif doesn't even include it in his Halakhic compendiums because he doesn't think it's even really Halakhic. And the Gaonim say it's only about Shema. Okay, later on it's going to take on a different tenor, different definition. That's fine. But Rav Sheshet talks about the hair of a woman being erva. That is going to become in some way stronger than Yehudit. Yehudit, modesty customs, well, that's nice. But if hair is erva, we have to protect women and men from nakedness. We don't go out naked. And so that idea is going to take on a lot of potency as we get through the Rishonim and very much into the Achronim. Okay? It was taught in a Braita. Kimchit had 7 sons. They all served as high priests. The sages asked her how she merited this, and she answered, "The walls of my house have never seen the hairs of my head." They said to her, "Many have done so without benefiting." So we have this mythical figure of Kimchit who never uncovers her hair and has 7 high priests for sons, which leads the Bavli to say, did they die? Oh no, they all became impure at different times and stepped in for one another. It's a curious story. But the rabbis of the Talmud don't seem to be particularly impressed with her behavior, and they don't tout it as behavior we should all emulate. So we have the hair of a woman is erva, we have kimchit, and now we have the Zohar. Rabbi Chizkiah said, "A stupor shall befall the man who allows his wife to let her hair be seen protruding forth. This is one of the modest practices of the home. A woman who exposes some of her hair for self-adornment causes poverty for her household, causes her children to be unimportant in their generation, and causes a foreign spirit to dwell in her house. What causes all of this? The hair of her head that could be seen protruding forth. If this is true within the home, how much more so in the marketplace? And how much more so could it lead to even further brazenness?" This really gets at what I was suggesting is behind Yehudit, brazenness. Thus the verse, "Your wife shall be as a fruitful vine in the innermost parts of her house." Rav Yehuda stated the hair of the head of a woman being exposed causes other hair to be revealed and harm her. Thus a woman is required to ensure that even the beams of her house not see a single hair of her head, and all the more so outdoors. We're seeing here an amalgamation of really 3 different threads. We're seeing Yehudit because he talks about the modesty practices of the home. He talks about the idea that certainly in the marketplace it will lead to brazenness, which was hinted at in the Mishnah. By the consequence of no ketubah, we understand that seems to be the concern. We see erva here because with the idea that it all has to be covered, has to be completely contained, and we see kimchit, the idea not a single hair of the head must be exposed for any reason, it will bring devastation upon her household. The Zohar is going to have a lot of impact, especially later on Hasidic communities, but even before that, the idea that somehow a woman covering every hair of her head will protect the home, that becomes a very major idea that is going to be used very aggressively, very centrally when we get to 16, 17, 1800s, when we move to the Achronim. And I want to even suggest for women, this holds out the promise of protection, right? If you just do this, you will protect your children, your husband, your home. It's very, very compelling. The Maharam al-Shaker comes along and says, okay, that's very nice, but the Zohar is not the final word of anything. And I don't think we should determine halacha based on the Zohar or everything in the Zohar. Let's see what he says. We can't read the whole thing, so I'll just cherry pick. I was asked a question by a friend about women who expose their hair outside of the veil for beauty, and whether we have to listen to the one who said this is an inheritance of lies of the women who are accustomed to uncover hair, for it is an absolute prohibition, and it is explicitly said a woman's hair is erva, and therefore it is appropriate to rebuke them and warn them not to expose their hair. Okay, we said we're in the 16 and 1700s, I think I said, and women are uncovering some of their hair, right? With all the stuff that's being written and the Zohar and the Erva and so on. And men are coming to the Maharam and saying, this is an abomination, right? These women are uncovering their nakedness. And the Maharam is absolutely going to shoot them down. It is clear there's no reason to be concerned for this hair at all, since the custom is to expose it. I'm not really worried, says the Maharam. The fact that women allow hair to fall around their face, we can live with that. We're okay. It's going to be okay. And even for Kriyat Shema, it ties into that idea we saw last week, familiarity and habituation within reason. Downgrade something from erva, from nakedness. And the hair that is erva is only with regard to hair that a woman is accustomed to cover, comparable to the hand's breadth and so on. Okay, I'm going to skip. And the Rif eliminated all this from the topic of Shema and so on and so forth, right? It can now be established that according to all of this, hair outside the veil has no prohibited status. I'm not worried about hair that women allow to fall outside of their veil. We're not concerned about that at all. I'm going to skip down to the Aruch. And the Aruch wrote that when a woman wrapped up her hair, the Aruch who's in the 11th century, right around the time of Rashi, when a woman wrapped up her hair, she would leave some out between her ears and forehead, opposite the sides of her face. And she brings lime and applies it to the hair that she does not braid and lets it fall and creates a bang with it. He says, I'm going back to a pre-Zohar source. And the Aruch is describing women wrapping their hair and letting hair fall out and creating a bang and applying lime to it so it stays put. And what does he say? A rich woman combs it with perfumes and good oils. I happen to love these little moments of how women are living their lives, and that poor women want their hair to stay put, kind of like gel. So they use lime, which is very, very cheap, but wealthy women get to use the perfume and the good oils. Okay. And this is the custom itself, says the Maharam. And the custom today is women wrap their hair and leave out hair on the temples that falls onto their face. And the sages called this temples, as we will explain. And it's customary to comb this hair with perfumes and oils like the rich women in days gone by. And he basically says, this doesn't bother me at all. This is the practice of women. Women have been doing this for a long time. This is hair. We're not worried about every strand of hair being nakedness. This is something women do. This is the way they dress their hair. And now let's see what he says about the Zohar. And all that you will find in the Zohar, who was stringent regarding uncovering of hair of the women. It is possible this was when the custom was to cover, but in the Talmud it's clear it was only talking about hair normally covered in Shema. He basically says, I don't know, meaning maybe there were some women who didn't uncover. And let us stand and cry out at those who prohibit this hair for a woman in her household, because of saying hair of a woman is erva, without knowing about which hair we are talking about. Now he's going to get a little snarky. What is he going to say? He says, well, if hair is so problematic, then maybe women have to shave their eyebrow hair, right? Like if a woman's hair is erva, well, maybe like the Nazir who has to shave his beard and his eyebrows, then maybe that's what a married woman has to do. I mean, if you're going to really go with hair is erva, maybe that has to be shaved also. And if it was with regard to a married woman and so on, he says, do you think all men are staring at married women with sexual intent at even a little bit finger, a little, what do we think men are so wicked? And so basically, he then goes down and says, hold on, how little do the men respond or react to such things? He's like, for they are accustomed to them from the earliest of days and from years ago in most of the diaspora under Yishmael in the Muslim countries. And there is no reason to protest. And how did the Zohar take it into his heart to prohibit? And even if it was prohibited from the Torah, we would, even if it was, which I'm not sure it is, says the Maharam, we would say leave them alone because you know what? They're not going to cover all their hair. And better they sin unintentionally. Don't tell them, even if, leave them alone. And were I less timorous, I would say, even for those women who have been exiled from the land of the uncircumcised, I love the way he says this, right? The land of the Ishmaelites and the land of the uncircumcised, which is Christendom, whose practice was to cover all of their hair when they were there. They should not be warned about uncovering, since they have established their dwelling place here, and they are not planning to return. So nowhere does the Maharam say they can go around with bared head. That would be unthinkable. By the way, it would be unthinkable in Muslim communities and even in Christian communities. Women either gathered their hair or covered their heads. That was the societal norms of modesty in many parts of the world. So we're talking about the Jewish practices. And the Maharam says, I don't agree that women ever really covered all of their hair. I can go back to the Talmud, I can go back to the Aruch, and hair that we are familiar with is not sexualized. And we don't have to worry. And I don't really know what the Zohar is doing there. And even if it were Doraita, he says, even if, I don't even think I would tell women then because they're going to uncover the bang. They're going to let their hair fall around the veil. Why should they sin intentionally? Okay, really beautiful tshuva. It goes on and on. I've curated it. It's worth looking at. So now we're going to move on to what starts happening right, in the period from around 16th century on, 15th, 16th century on. We've seen the Maharam. I wanted to start with him. He's aware of communities, especially in the Muslim communities where Jews are living, that women are not covering all their hair. And the tension comes in that women are coming from other communities where the practice was to cover and the women want to uncover. And who's upset? The men. The men are upset. Okay, and so he really gives them a dressing down. He clarifies everything. It's a wonderfully, wonderful tshuva. And he says, look, this is what we do, but there's habituation and there's familiarity, and not everything is sexualized, and not everything has to be covered, and we're okay. And this is what women do. They use perfumes, they use oils, they use lime if they're poor, but this is what women do, and we are not going to stop them from doing. We're now going to see a move towards stringency because I brought you the Maharam. Everything could have looked different if we all agreed with the Maharam. We don't all agree with the Maharam. And I want to bring you the Bach and then the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer is probably the most important source to contrast with the Maharam. Maharam is in the Sephardi communities. The Khatam Sofer is in, not Budapest, in Prague? Prague, yes. Okay. And the practice is the Bach is in Poland, in Krakow. The practice is that in all of Israel, she does not remain bareheaded without a kippah and kerchief on her head, even in front of the men of her household, and not according to the commentary of Rashi, Tosfot, and Ran. So the Bach comes along and says women that he's familiar with are covering their hair in their homes all the time. I skipped the part of the Talmud that seems to suggest, or it doesn't seem to suggest, states that in her own courtyard, women would uncover their heads. Right? That was in the Talmud already. And if you didn't let them do that, women would not stay married. The Bach comes along and says, I know what Rashi, Tosfot, and Ran say, that in a woman's own household, she can uncover her hair, but you should know The practice in all of Israel, in Israel, she does not remain bareheaded. Now, I'm very deliberately taking you on a journey post Rambam, where we're seeing the Maharam and women are beginning. The Zohar cover absolutely everything. The Maharam, what are you talking about? Let's look at what women are doing. Hair is falling around their face. That's okay. We're back in Christendom. Remember, the Maharam knows that in Christendom, women are covering more of their hair. And we have the Bach saying women are covering all of their hair. And the Khatam Sofer now says, since the authorities were divided and the strict view became customary. Now, the strict view has not become customary in Turkey and in Portugal and those other Sephardi countries. In the Ashkenazi countries, it has. It is considered outright law. He says there's nothing to talk about. The custom is now law, having been adopted long ago by our ancestors throughout the Jewish diaspora. As a result, a wife requires a kerchief even in her own room and a hat, as well as in a marketplace or public square. In our lands where the non-Jewish women go out with bared heads, now this is true. He's writing in the late 1800s. Christian women don't cover their heads. Muslim women do. Right? So we're seeing differences in geography. Non-Jewish women go out with bared heads. Our mothers did not go out in such a manner, and we're very careful of this and heeded the words of the Zohar. And we're stringent. Even though if we were called to account to determine halacha, we would say, he agrees, the status of hair outside the veil in the Talmud is towards leniency. He brings the Aruch, and he says the halacha is not like the Zohar. Nonetheless, since the custom is like the Zohar in this matter, it uproots, it supplants the law, right? Very, very strong statement. And in general, the general principle is any hair on the head and forehead in a married woman, even in her room, is erva. If she does not wear a kerchief on her head and in the market and in courtyard, also a hat and so on, it is all erva. And he agrees in a place where she braids and oils her hair in place, it's not erva, meaning in Islamic countries. But in our lands, where the custom is like the Zohar, it uproots halacha. So we're seeing a split. We're going to continue to see that split between Ashkenaz and Sfarad, with Sfarad relying on the principles of familiarity and habituation, which permeate Erva discussions about how much of a woman's body can be uncovered when a man says Shema. But in Ashkenaz, we're seeing something far more stringent, far more inflexible, and very much influenced by the Zohar. Before I get to the Igrot Moshe, I want to show you the Aruch HaShulchan. Because with all due respect to the Khatam Sofer, who has made it, tremendous respect, he has made it sound like all women are covering their hair all the time, in their rooms, in their homes, double head covering. We're now going to look at the Aruch HaShulchan, who lives more or less at the same time, a little later maybe than the Khatam Sofer, more or less in the same part of the world, Belarus, right? One's in Prague, one's in Belarus. They're not that far apart in terms of culture, in terms of geography. The Aruch HaShulchan describes the following phenomena. Let us denounce the practice which for many years, due to our many sins, has become widespread, in which the daughters of Israel have broken the fences and go about with their hair uncovered. Our great consternation about this does not help, and this plague has spread, that the married women walk about as the virgins with their hair uncovered. Woe unto us that this has happened in our days. However, as far as the law is concerned, it seems it would be permissible to pray and recite blessings in front of their uncovered heads, since now the majority do this, their hair has the status of parts of the body, which are normally uncovered. So what I love about the Aruch HaShulchan is he does not say it's okay. He says it's still a mitzvah to cover your hair, but hair cannot be erva if so many women are walking around with uncovered hair. Right? If hair is really like walking around naked, we men will have to closet ourselves in the house and never walk outside. But it's not like that. It's like the hair of the virgins. It's very present. It's very ubiquitous. And now we can make brachot and say Shema in it. And so he says, and since by us the married women behave the same way, there is no concern for sexual thoughts. And the Rif and the Rambam and so on and so forth, we're not going to go into that. So what we see here is a source being written as the Khatam Sofer is saying everyone is following the Zohar. The Aruch HaShulchan is saying, well, not where I'm living. and not in Lithuania, not in Belarus. All the women are uncovering their hair and we're yelling and screaming and they don't seem to care. And now what I need to write about is Kriyat Shema and whether a man can say Shema in front of a married woman's uncovered hair. And he rules that yes, you can. Before I go back to the Igro Moshe, because really that brings us into the mid 1900s, two more noteworthy chuvas because something similar is happening in Baghdad and in Morocco. Right? Something's happening in the 19th century. There's no question. Emancipation, reformation, modernization. Women are becoming aware. There's more travel of the fashions that are coming out of parts of Europe, France maybe, in terms of Baghdad and Morocco. And it is influencing their connection to this mitzvah. The Ben Ish Chai. The women here in Baghdad have seen women of Europe whose practice is not to cover their hair in front of strangers, and who nonetheless dress modestly and do not reveal their bodies, only their faces and their necks, the palms of their hands and their heads. Indeed, their hair is also uncovered, although according to us such is forbidden. They, however, have a justification, these women from Europe, because they say this practice was not accepted among all the women of Europe. Again, we're in the 19th century, towards the end in Baghdad, and the Ben Ish Chai is listening to the voices of the women. And the women are from Europe are coming and saying, yeah, there are communities in Europe where we didn't cover our hair at all. That's our minhag. Right? So I'm holding this all together. I've got the Khatam, the Bach, and the Khatam Sofer, and the Aruch HaShulchan, and now I have the Ben Ish Chai in Baghdad reporting about women from Europe saying, yeah, we never covered our hair. Both Jewish and non-Jewish women uncover their hair, just like they uncovered their hands and their faces, and looking at them does not generate immodest thoughts among the men. He does not rule that it's okay. Neither did the Aruch HaShulchan. But there's something thoughtful going on here, a thought process, that uncovered hair does not seem to be erva if the rest of the body and the decorum is modest. That seems to be where we're holding. Rav Mashash is an important moment. He's the rabbi of Morocco. He's in Casablanca, I think you say, and later becomes the chief rabbi of Haifa. He writes a compelling defense of the women in Morocco who are no longer covering their hair. And he quotes the Maharam al-Shaker, and he basically says, no, my child, the prohibition of, by the way, the story is interesting. It's the parents of a man who is married to a woman who has moved to Casablanca and has ripped off her hair covering. They were living outside in like the villages because all the French Moroccan women are not covering their hair. And his wife is saying, I am not going to look different than everyone else. They're not covering their hair. I'm not covering their hair. And mom and dad back home are absolutely appalled and want him to divorce her. And this gets to the Rav Mashash, who basically defends her, who says, look, if this is what's happening, then I'm pulling together all of these earlier pieces, the Mishnah and the Midrash Halacha, and what he says is there's so much stringency that has increased over the years. If I go back to the Gemara, I really think there's room to permit women to uncover their hair. That's what he ends up concluding. I don't have time to go through the whole thing. Again, it's very, very interesting. He says at the end, many thanks to God, we have found numerous openings to enter in a lawful rather than an unlawful manner. He rereads Rabbi Yishmael. He brings a Rashi. Very interesting. And basically at the end, he says, the upshot of all this is that hair covering for women is only obligatory from the standpoint of custom alone. Now, there's a problem here. The problem is that if he could really peel back all the layers and go to the Mishnah, I would agree with him. I think his reading of the earlier Tanaitic sources is correct, but you can't ignore almost 2,000 years of the layering that happens because the Bavli says it's a doraita. But nonetheless, he's the chief rabbi of Morocco. He is using halakhic analysis of early rabbinic sources, and he's saying, I really think that there was a left turn somewhere. Well, the left turn was the Bavli, but okay, a left turn somewhere that caused this to become obligation when really it was custom. It was the modesty customs of the daughters of Israel. I once taught this, and I had a woman in my class whose grandmother was from Morocco and was married to a rabbi also from Morocco. And she did not cover her hair because she had gotten a personal psak from Rav Mashash that it was only custom and that she did not have to. So this has impact within his community. However, it's important to say it does not become accepted. Even Rav Ovadia Yosef, who is a not a direct student, but he is a student of Rav Mashash. I think it's fair to say that. Respects him, admires him, rejects his conclusion here. We'll see Rav Ovadia. So if Rav Mashash with the Ben Ish Chai and the Aruch HaShulchan, who are already beginning to think about Erva, and it's not Erva, and women are uncovering, had all kind of gathered together, then it is possible there's that moment at the beginning of the 20th century where so many women are uncovering. An entire generation of OU rabbis' wives, right? We know the famous Rav Soloveitchik, but many, I've sat in giving shiur at Matan to many women who were the wives of rabbis from the OU in the 1940s, and they're like, yeah, none of us covered our hair, right? There's this whole momentum happening, and then it's going to stop and it's going to turn back. And essentially, the halachic consensus is women have to cover their heads, their hair, something. And I want to get to, in the 15 minutes I have, what happens when women enter the conversation. So before I get to the women, and we're going to get to them in a moment, I do think it's worth just seeing briefly Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe is also, he starts writing about women and head covering. He says, I'd rather not write it down. I know there's room for misunderstanding. I would prefer to answer orally. There's an obligation to clarify halakha. And he interestingly also says the Gemara only talks about the head, not the hair. He does something very interesting here. And he says, I don't want to go against the Chatam Sofer and the Bach, although I don't really understand where they got their stringencies from. And his final conclusion, because his shaila is also about, does a man divorce his wife without a ketubah if she stops covering her hair, is that no, that's no longer relevant. It is not promiscuous for a woman to uncover her hair in today's society to the point that it loses her ketubah. So he actually answers a similar question to Rav Mashash, but in the end he says, no, women have to cover their hair. I'm not going to go as far as Rav Mashash, but I am not going to penalize such women and force a get without a ketubah. So again, something to be aware of. The second thing Rav Moshe does, which is important, is, remember we saw last week the whole idea of an unbared tefach is permitted up to a tefach. And he applies that principle for the first time ever to hair, that you can unbear a tefach, a hand's breadth, which is like 7 to 9 centimeters of hair. And that's why you'll have a lot of women who wear something like a beret with some hair sticking out, maybe in the front, maybe in the back, maybe a little bit, right? That's based on a position of Rav Moshe, who starts treating the measurement of hair in a very exacting way, something that we had not really seen until then. Okay, we're going to move on. The Mishnah Brura, he takes a very hard line, a very heavy position. It can never be permitted. I want to look at Rav Ovadia, and then, as I said, we'll look at what happens when women come into the conversation. Today, it has become widespread practice for God-fearing women to go out with only a kerchief or hat, without a headscarf or veil, and no one makes a fuss. It thus seems the essential concept of women covering their hair is biblical in nature. He calls it an asmachta, and is obligatory. It's biblical in nature, irrespective of changes in practice, and is unchanging for all time. However, with respect to the modest practices of Jewish women, we accept any established practice to be lenient. This accords with the ruling of the Maharam al-Shaker, who permits women in places where the practice is for them to do so, to go about with hair protruding from under their hat. Now, he doesn't go into how much hair, and what if she has hair all the way down her shoulders, but he does open this door that communities and communities of women can determine an established practice. And I myself, and I can repeat this as Torah Shabbal Peh, I heard Rav Nachum Rabinovich echo the same halachic sentiment, which that if it is accepted in a community for a woman to wear a certain head covering, even though much of her hair is exposed, then that would be within the halachic contours of the discussion, not of erva, but Maybe erva is no longer relevant with so much familiarity of hair, more along the lines of the dat Yehudit conversation, which is essentially biblical in nature. And I heard him say, someone asked him, what about a headband? And we'll talk about the headband phenomenon in a moment, that the headbands really are somewhat are minimal. The hair is exposed, but in Israel, it is a clear sign of marriage. You see these headbands and you recognize that women have chosen to put these on after they're married, and that fits into kind of the spaces between Rav Ovadia and what I explicitly heard Rav Nachum Rabinovich say, although he never wrote it down. Okay. What I have here, I'm not going to go into, we don't have time. I brought you lots of other sources for you to enjoy. What I want to talk about now are wigs and headbands, because one of the things I write about in my book is that I believe both of those reflect women's agency, women's control, women's connection to the mitzvah in their own way. And of course, they also reflect very different communities. Okay. The shaitel comes onto the scene really, I mean, already hundreds of years ago. Even in the Mishnah, they talk about using foreign hair on the head, probably very coarse, nothing like what we have today. But the Shiltei Giburim, I think it's about 400 years ago, says women cannot wear wigs. That's ludicrous. Meaning if hair is erva, then hair is erva. However, right, by the 20th century, the shaitel begins to be a real option for women to cover their hair. And part of it, and I'll just, paraphrase, I'm shortening quite a bit here, but I want to get into it. Part of it has to do with so many women have uncovered. So many women, if you go to Ellis Island, there's a photograph I remember of women throwing their shaitlach into the water because their husbands have written to them, do not get off the boat with a shaitel. I won't take you home. I don't want a wife who looks like a greena. I don't want a wife who looks like an immigrant. So again, the 20th century, for all of the Khatam Sofer, right? A lot of people are uncovering their hair, especially when they come to America. The shaitel is part of a rejuvenation of hair covering. It leads the Lubavitcher Rebbe to say we should embrace and endorse shaitlach. The nicer, the better. Because if a woman wears a shaitel, she's covering her erva, right? That would be the erva school, that you're covering all of your erva, all of your hair. And you can't just take it off when it's uncomfortable. Who's going to take off her shaitel in the middle of the marketplace when she's in someone's home, right? It will ensure that she leaves it on all the time. Shaitel, hair under the shaitel does not look good, as I can testify when I wear one, right? And we want her to look beautiful because we want her to be beautified. Ze'eliva anveyo. We want her to be beautified by her mitzvah. There's nothing wrong with her looking attractive in a beautiful shaitel. And in fact, Chabad has funds for poor brides to have very beautiful shaitel. And the shaitel industry today is so high end, right? And for some of us, that's astonishing. But it shouldn't be, because it became a way for women why do women uncover their hair? They want to look like everyone else. They want to look attractive. They want to feel good about themselves. The rabbis who endorse shaitlach understand there's a vanity piece to this that we can play off of. And if we endorse the shaitel, then more women are going to, it becomes a whole community of women. It becomes an industry of women who are covering their hair. And the fact that there's a lace net and not a lace net and the part and like what you can get today with the technology is astonishing. Rav Moshe writes already years ago, before it looked this good, within those communities, they can tell. They can tell. They know. They're so familiar with shaitlach that no matter how good they get, you can always find the little hint at where the shaitel is. And so he says there's no problem. So that's one way in which women took ownership. I really want to argue strongly that it comes from women connecting to the mitzvah and they need to look good. I'm not talking about the communities that shave their head. We don't even have time to get into the Hasidic communities, women who shave their head, the Zohar, not letting any hair stick out, and then they wear a shaitel and a hat. That's a different level of shaitel. That's not the shaitel in Bnei Brak for, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, right? The really are 20,000 shekel. That's not that shaitel. But shaitels have succeeded because women have really connected to the mitzvah. I'm doing a mitzvah and I get to look good. On the other end of the spectrum are women in headbands who said, look, we want to do this mitzvah. More and more women are using the mikveh, in my opinion, also because female ritual, female connection, history, we want to go back and connect. But we are not wearing a shaitel. We want to look like ourselves, and we want to have the headband which connects us to Rav Ovadia, or even though Rav Ovadia wouldn't have endorsed it, or Rav Rabinovich, right? We want something that the minute we get married, we now have a statement. The whole idea of the headband as a sign of marriage, siman l'nisuin, is an interpretation, but a pretty good one. And that's also coming from women. And many of those women have mothers who did not cover their hair. And many of those women would have opted to not cover their hair, or they have women who covered all their hair, right? I go to shul now. A lot of the girls wearing headbands have mothers with full kerchiefs, but they're wearing a headband and their mother stands next to them. And I think there's gratefulness that my daughter just didn't decide to get rid of it completely, right? Both of them opened up spaces where women could find themselves within the mitzvah. And in my opinion, both are fully endorsed with reading of the halachic sources. Two different streams. One is the Erva school, one is the Dat Yudit school. But both of them have now been taken on by women. And of course, in between, you have the baseball caps, and you have the big African wraps, and you have hats with pom poms, which is what I like to wear, right? Like lots of hipster hats. So it really has become something that women have defined themselves by in a very external way, and has become part of the community's integration of this mitzvah in modernity. And of course, every community looks at the, oh no, you too much, too little. How can you wear a shaitel? It's okay. We like to be a little judgy about what other people do, and then that reinforces our own confidence and our own choices. But I really do feel strongly that this has become something that is a strong expression of a woman's ritual that is being taken on by the communities of women, all these different communities of women who are practicing them. Thank you very much. Got to the end. I've got the 2 minutes. I always cover a lot. I hope I kept you following. I try to summarize as I go along to just reinforce and to show that really it's a 3,000-year-old conversation. I do believe in the ancient world, women are covering their hair, their heads. That would have been what everyone was doing. And as the generations go on, how does that manifest itself in different communities, geographically different communities, and then of course in the modern world where we're all globally connected.
The thing that bothered me about Shaitlich is that the only one you look good for is not your husband, right? The only one who gets you
It's
look
so
terrible
true.
for your husband, and you look great
It's
for
so
everybody
true.
else. And I
But
never could understand that. I mean,
yeah,
it,
yeah. You're making a good comment. I think women in that community will defend it in some way, and their husbands will say, "I'm very proud of the way she wears this sheitel and she looks good and whatever." But yeah, that I think you have to be from within the community to really understand it, and I recognize that. I recognize that.
Um, well, my husband and I are about Shiva, but he prefers that I wear a tichel, but I want to wear a sheitel.
Uh-huh.
So
Yes,
he's,
many rabbis will say it's your mitzvah and you decide. Meaning that obviously I don't want to get in the way of shalom bayis,
right.
but if you would come to a rav, and I think Rav Moshe got the same shaila, a man who didn't want his wife to wear a sheitel, and he said, I can send you that. It's in my book.
Rav,
You let her wear the sheitel. It's her
Rav
mitzvah.
Soloveitchik also said that
Rav Soloveitchik said it
woman,
also.
it's a woman. In fact, I had to run home one yontif to get a hat because Mrs. Soloveitchik forgot to bring a hat for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur.
That's a lovely story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Anyone
wonder
else?
whether,
Yeah,
sorry,
sorry.
I wonder whether the expression Dutch Yehudit is an allusion to the wife of Yehuda who covered her hair.
Yeah, right. Own, Own Ben Pellet, that whole story I didn't think the wife of Yehuda covered her hair, but no, it seems to be. I tried to argue, but I wanted to go into it saying it had to do with like Yehudit, maybe Judith, or the wife. Like I wanted to see if there was a woman allusion there. But then I found the Tosefta. I can't remember exactly what I found, but it was clearly it was Yehudim in the Tosefta's manuscript, it seems like that's a more accurate, that it was really dot Yehudim that got called dot Yehudit in the Mishnah, which would be like the dot of the Jews, not so much, nothing to do with women. I mean, it's about women, but that phrase is not specifically about Jew, like it's a more generic phrase.
Why do you think it went back? I'm in my mid-70s. I grew up in Akiva. Like the only person I ever saw a sheitel on at that time was a lady in the bakery, and it actually you could see the seam down the middle, and it was like really, really an ugly sheitel. So I assumed that you wore it to be ugly. But
Mhm.
I, for the life of me, I don't understand. My friends, when they got married, never covered their hair. My mother's generation did. My grandmother didn't. What
What do
happened?
I think happened? I think
Yeah.
seminary, honestly, I think what ended up happening is, or like, first of all, there's the whole generation. If you talk about the 1970s, I'm going to go to the 1980s. The 1980s, women begin going to their year in seminary. And I think that has tremendous impact. The year in Israel studying. And remember, as the guys get more from, as they learn, the tzitzis come out and the kippah gets bigger, and they also have a lot of outward expressions. They go to minyan 3 times a day, daf yomi, which I learned, but beseder, that was less common in the 80s. And this idea of what are we going to do? Right? What are we going to take on that show our increased commitment? And that's why I think the skirt pants thing becomes more skirts become the more absolute accepted garb for women. Now in modern Orthodoxy we're moving back a little bit. The skirt and the head covering, those were the kippah and tzitzit. Like what else do you have? And I think they learned about it. Also, the way they were taught it left no room for equivocation. You're taught that this is the halachically accepted practice. And I think more and more of them wanted that, and they were marrying guys who wanted that. And I think that whole learning revolution was transformative. I do. I think that's what had the big impact.
Even with the Kippah Strigah guys? I mean,
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
that's my
yeah.
generation and
Yeah, yeah. They
Kippah
wanted they
Strigah
they're
guys.
learning they're learning in yeshiva and seminary that this is the halachically, and all the sources I brought largely back that with a few
True,
outlying opinions that don't get
true,
accepted. So I
true.
again, puk chazi means go out and see what people do. If the trend to not cover had continued, then it would look different today. But remember, the Haredi world is never really started. The Haredi world
Yeah.
picks it back up and really holds tight with the shaitel and the kerchiefs and so on. And the modern Orthodox world gradually really there's a resurgence. And I think a lot of women, also the shaitels are nicer. Women can get a fall, they can get a little kippah fall. Like there are so many options that allow a woman to still look like herself, that I think that also the wig technologies got better, the headbands. Suddenly women are like, oh, I can do a headband. That's cute. I like that. And I'll wear my jeans and a headband, very Israeli. But I'll wear that.
Right.
And in my communities, people will know that I'm married. But it's not that big a change. All of this is happening in the last 30, 40 years.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got to go. It's already late. I'm sorry. I have to get up early to teach another class, but it has
I
been
just
really a pleasure and a privilege. It's been wonderful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for
Thank you,
those.
Thank you.
Samantha.
It's
so much.
wonderful,
I for
wonderful.
sure
Thank
wasn't
you
going to
so
say
much.
anything for this class. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Look forward to learning with you again. Thank you, everybody else. Tonight, 8:30, Mark Shapiro and all our classes this week. And
Want
we
to
look
look
forward
at
to working
some of
with
the
you.
pictures and send it?
I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Are you okay? No, no, I saw that. Okay. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Look forward to learning with you soon. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.